Welcome back to War Room TV. I'm your host, Jim Jordan. Today we have Scott Ritter joining us. Scott, thank you.
We've seen Israel drifting towards a radical right-wing dominated nation where traditional secular Judaism has been captured by this radical Zionist philosophy, where tolerance of the Palestinian people, tolerance of Arabs, tolerance of anybody who dares to question the God-given right of the Jewish people to reassert themselves over greater Israel. It gets shouted down that you can't have a discussion, you can't have a debate. I'm not condoning the murder of civilians. I would never condone the murder of civilians, but I think we have to view the Hamas actions on October 7th in a different light. Yes, civilians died, and in those cases where they were deliberately gunned down by Hamas fighters or other fighters from Gaza, they should be condemned and they should be held accountable. But this was a military operation against a military target. Gaza is an open-air concentration camp. The Palestinians who have been imprisoned there for decades had no hope. And the paradigm had to be shifted, and Hamas has done that by launching this attack. Israel is going to have to be defeated, and I don't mean defeated in the way of eliminating Israel. I don't believe in that. I believe Israel has a right to exist, and Israel has a right to exist in peace and security. But that's a two-way proposition. Israel has to be willing to live in peace with its neighbors. It can't just demand that its neighbors tolerate an aggressive Israeli posture. Political Zionism is the enemy here, not Israel, but political Zionism. And Hamas is at war with political Zionism. How this war ends will determine Israelis' behavior. I believe that Israel has found that, contrary to its expectations, the international community has not aligned itself fully with Israel to condemn the Hamas actions. Again, I think everybody condemns the senseless slaughter of civilian life, but one can't forget in the same breath that we condemn any excesses carried out by Hamas or Palestinian militants, that we must also condemn the excesses of the Israeli Defense Force and what they're doing to Gaza. Over 6,500 murdered. It's not killed. This isn't combat what's taking place.
Exactly.
We can't call an Israeli pilot flying over Gaza and a $35 million F-35 fighter dropping bombs on civilian buildings. That's not war. That's murder. That's a war crime. At least Hamas had the courage to close with and engage Israeli forces in face-to-face combat. And Hamas suffered heavy casualties as a result. That was war. What Israel is doing to Gaza is not war. It's the brutal slaughter of an innocent civilian population, a helpless civilian population trapped in a prison of Israel's own making. And I think the world is seeing this and rejecting this. And this is the key to any outcome, because Israel will have to be convinced that in order to survive, it will have to change the way it relates with the Palestinian people. It will have to accept a Palestinian nation that is the equal of Israel in every way. The day of Israeli exceptionalism, the day of Israeli supremacy is over. And Hamas has proven that.
There's a terrible situation now in Gaza. People inside Gaza can't go in Egypt. Egypt has blocked. Israel is bombing them. They move from south to north. Even there, they are being bombed. There's no fuel, no electricity. Hospitals are almost coming to a grinding halt. In that kind of scenario, when West is virtually backing this bombing, carpet bombing, because they are not going beyond just usual conventional statements. They are weaponizing Israel. So what kind of scenario is building up out of this, one of the greatest humanitarian crises in the modern history?
I don't want to sound insensitive and I don't want to sound harsh, but we are at an inflection point in world history, in Middle Eastern history. If the Palestinian people are to have a future at all, now is the time that the world needs to rally around a Palestinian state. And they won't do that by giving in to Israeli demands. The population of Palestine has no future if we simply return to the status quo. If at the end of this conflict, we return to a concentration camp where 2 million people are held hostage by a supremacist Israel, a Zionist Israel, and Hamas will be forever condemned to find outlets for the hatred that accrues from such a reality. You know, in the history of mankind, we've seen figures talk about nonviolent resistance. We've seen figures speak of the need to go on a protest, whether it's a hunger strike or simply saying, I will not accept this anymore, and I challenge you to beat me into submission, but I will never submit. The Palestinian people are in a position now where they are being called upon to make the ultimate sacrifice for their future of Palestine. They must withstand this horror. They must sacrifice themselves to this horror, because only by subjecting the world to the reality of the consequences of Israeli policies will there be change. If the Palestinian people allow themselves to be removed from Gaza, that's what Israel wants. And it means they will never have a homeland. If the Palestinian people allow a ceasefire to take place to bring them humanitarian assistance without changing Israeli policy, then they have achieved nothing. But if the Palestinian people, through their courage, are participating in the consequences of the brutal policies of Israel that are tolerated by the West, if the Palestinian people do not yield and show instead the starving babies, the diseased population, the dead civilians, and are willing to sacrifice themselves on this altar, the world will come to their assistance. The world will pressure Israel to change its ways, but only if the Palestinian people do not yield on this issue. They cannot yield on this issue, because once they yield, Israel wins.
Israel military launched a limited ground offensive. I perhaps can't call it a ground offensive. It immediately withdrew. And do you think they're testing the water, or they really have some kind of plan to go for a ground offensive? Perhaps this ground offensive may be on the debris of Gaza?
I think what we saw last night was for the propaganda move, for domestic political consumption. Israel needed to be seen as doing something. They've been promising a ground offensive for 2 weeks now. They've assembled 300,000 troops. They had to be seen as doing something. What was accomplished last night? Nothing. We got videotapes of Israeli tanks probing Gaza and then withdrawing from Gaza. They were not decisively engaged by Hamas. Hamas could care less about that probe. But Israel is being confronted by the United States and others who are saying, you cannot carry out a ground offensive because the dangers of escalation are real. Hezbollah could become involved. Iran could become involved. Then we have a regional conflict, the outcome of which is uncertain. There is no guarantee that Israel and the United States would win a regional conflict. In fact, many military analysts, myself included, think that Israel and the United States would lose a regional conflict, not in terms of, again, the destruction of Israel or the destruction of the United States, but we would lose by not winning, because it's a conflict we can't win. So Israel is frustrated right now. Their politicians, we need to also remember this. Every Israeli politician and every general that stands before the public today and speaks so aggressively and with such certainty about the Israeli cause betrayed Israel. They are the ones responsible for October 7th. They are the ones responsible for everything that has happened. And so they are desperate to retain their significance as authority figures. And so they are looking for visually pleasing demonstrations. And that's what we had last night, a visually pleasing demonstration of power that was nothing, no such thing. It shows Israel's weakness. Israel cannot fight a war in Gaza and win. They don't have an army capable of fighting a war in Gaza and winning, but they have talked so strongly about fighting a war in Gaza and winning that they have to be seen as doing something. And so that's what last night was, a demonstration of nothing, trying to convince people that it was something.
How do you interpret militarily the presence of 2 US aircraft carrier in the Middle East? Will it deter Iran? Will it deter Hezbollah? Or will it deter the other Arab countries, which I don't think they will? But if there is any possibility, there perhaps Hezbollah may intervene from the northern side of Israel. What kind of scenario can possibly build up? But my understanding is that even Hezbollah is reluctant, Iran is reluctant. They don't want to escalate this war.
Well, let's start with that. There's a lot of talk in the West that Iran green-lighted the Hamas actions. This is the furthest thing from the truth. What Hamas did was a Hamas initiative done on a timing chosen by Hamas against objectives chosen by Hamas. Hezbollah, they're the only organization that's only Arab organization that's beat Israel twice. They beat Israel from 1995 to 2000 in southern Lebanon, and they beat Israel in 2006 in the 33-day war. But the price paid by the Lebanese people was horrific. The Israeli bombardment of West Beirut and Lebanese towns and villages in southern Lebanon exacted a horrific toll on the Lebanese people. And Lebanon today is a nation that's going through a serious political and economic crisis as a result of that and other things. Hezbollah is not just a military organization, it's a political party, and it's heavily engaged in the political processes inside Lebanon, trying to avoid political catastrophe, trying to rebuild Lebanon. They are committed to this. The last thing Hezbollah wants at this point in time is a conflict with Israel, because it will undo everything Hezbollah has been trying to achieve in Lebanon. Yes, the Hezbollah military forces will fight very well, and they will inflict horrific casualties on Israel. There's no doubt about that. But the people of Lebanon will suffer, and suffer egregiously, and this could do severe political harm for Hezbollah. This could be one of those situations where Hezbollah wins militarily, but loses politically. And so, and Hezbollah's goal is not the destruction of Israel. Hezbollah is a resistance organization seeking to get Israel to withdraw from Lebanese territory. To ship off arms is an instance. Now, they have spoken out in solidarity with Hamas, but they are not allied with Hamas. Hamas is an independent entity. Hezbollah is independent of Hamas. And so there is no necessity for Hezbollah to intervene, and Hezbollah does not want to intervene. But it is also an organization that has certain moral principles. And you can't speak of being a resistance organization and then sit back and do nothing when 2 million fellow Arabs, Palestinians, are being slaughtered, butchered, tortured, murdered by the Israelis. And so if Israel goes into Gaza with a ground operation, Hezbollah will have no choice but to intervene. But if we take a look at what Hezbollah and Israel are doing right now on the border, it is controlled escalation. It allows Hezbollah to say, we are doing something, and Israel's allowed to say, we are defending ourselves, but it's not blowing up into total war. Controlled escalation. It's a deadly game being played between Hezbollah and Israel, where both guys get to say, we're doing something, but they're avoiding the full-scale conflict. The same thing with Iran. Iran is not looking for a fight with Israel. Yes, Iran has many grievances against Israel, many legitimate grievances against Israel. Israel has assassinated its nuclear scientists. Israel has destroyed its nuclear facilities and others through covert action. Iran is not a friend of Israel, but the Iranian leadership does not exist to go to war against Israel. The Iranian leadership exists for the Iranian people. They care about the welfare of the Iranian nation, and the Iranian nation has suffered under economic sanctions for decades. And now there is an opportunity for Iran to emerge from this sanctioning environment and rebuild their economy, to bring about the kind of economic and social well-being for the Iranian people. They have joined BRICS. They made peace with Saudi Arabia. They've joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. This is their future. This is the future that they wanted. This gives the Iranian people hope, and Iran's not going to throw it all away to engage in a war with Israel. And so
the point that you earlier on made, Palestinians will have to fight on their own, and that is a bitter reality. And then you also indicated the greater possibility of Israeli losing this war, maybe at the cost of, huge collateral damages to the people inside Gaza. What kind of scope and shape of Israel's military defeat would be? Just give me some basic idea about it.
Well, it's up to Israel. First of all, Israel has already lost. They've lost. They've lost the war. They lost the war on October 7th when their government, which had promised and premised itself on the notion of security, was asleep at the wheel. They lost it on October 7th when Israeli intelligence, which was considered to be the best intelligence service in the world, failed to detect and predict the Hamas attack. They lost on October 7th when the Israeli army was defeated in a stand-up fight with Hamas fighters. So they've already lost. War is an extension of politics by other means. And so we can't just look at the military aspects of that. We have to understand the political consequences of this. And Israel has lost, and they're losing now, even though they're destroying Gaza, they're losing global opinion. Turkey has just come out, Recep Erdogan, and said that Hamas is not a terrorist organization. They are freedom fighters. They are liberators. And the sentiment around the world, especially as Israel continues to slaughter innocent Palestinian people, is that it's Israel who's the bad guy, not Hamas. So Israel lost the political fight already. How this ends is up to Israel. They can mitigate the damage done not only to themselves, but to the region by accepting a face-saving mechanism out. And I believe the face-saving mechanism will be a continued siege of Gaza, where they carry out more bombing, they carry out some limited raids like they did last night, and then the world will impose a ceasefire and Israel will back off. That means they lost, because Israel has said their objective is the complete destruction of Hamas. And anything less,
you foresee that happening?
No, Hamas, you can't defeat an ideology. You can't kill an ideology. Hamas is winning today because of Israel's actions. There are more people today who are aligning themselves with Hamas than ever before. People are saying this is the resistance to Israel that must happen. So Hamas is becoming stronger and stronger. Just like in 2006, where Israel promised the destruction of Hezbollah, they failed to deliver. Hezbollah won that, not because they physically defeated the Israelis, but because they survived. Hamas will win by surviving. Israel has created an impossible standard. It won't work. And this is why Israel will lose. And this is why Israel is losing. The question is what the scope and scale of that defeat is. Israel has exercised last year and this year what they call the full spectrum scenarios, where they have to deal with the West Bank, they have to deal with Gaza, they have to deal with Hezbollah, the Golan Heights, and Iran. Can the Israeli Defense Forces do this? And the answer is no. The Israeli Defense Forces can't do this. So Israel knows that they're setting themselves up for a strategic defeat, but they are so politically invested in being seen as responding adequately to a problem they made. The Israeli government is solely responsible for what happened on October 7th, solely responsible. And the international, the Israeli population is starting to recognize this. I think that politically what we're going to see is the Israeli people will lose faith in the Netanyahu government. The Netanyahu government will collapse. A new government will emerge, and that government will seek a negotiated end to this crisis. And the world will say, and is saying, look, Barack Obama just came out and said it. Joe Biden hinted at it. There can be no solution. The paradigm has been broken. The status quo is over. Whatever happens, there will be a Palestinian state. There will be a Palestinian state. And this is a huge victory for Hamas, a huge victory for the Palestinian people if they don't surrender, if they continue the struggle.
But over the years, we have seen that Netanyahu has been working 24 hours on one thing to make two-state solution as a non-viable project. He has been trying to normalize with Saudi Arabia and other Muslim countries. Do you think once this conflict ends in one way or the other, will be a revival of two-state solution, or Israel would be managing to go ahead with the normalization with the Muslim countries and put this Palestinian issue on the back burner?
No, I think that's the paradigm shift that's happened here. That's the end of the status quo that's happened here. Saudi Arabia has said, and it's very interesting what Saudi Arabia has done. A very clever move on Saudi Arabia's part. As opposed to closing the door on normalization with Israel, what they've done is said, we want to normalize relations with Israel. This is our goal, but it cannot happen until the Palestinian issue is resolved. You see, the prior formula was that under the Abraham Accord, that the Palestinian issue had been put on the back burner, not even on the back burner, taken off the stove, put in the freezer. No one was talking about a Palestinian state. It was over. And Saudi Arabia was actively engaged in the normalization of relations with Israel. Israel had won that issue. They had made the Palestinian issue go away. Hamas has brought it back. It will never go away. And now Saudi Arabia is saying that there will be no normalization until there's a Palestinian state. That's the difference this time. And the Netanyahu government is politically destroyed. Right now, the population is like a body that's in shock. You've been shot, you've been hurt, you're in shock. You have adrenaline in, you have and the endorphins have kicked in, and you're standing up. But soon those are going to fade away, and the extent of the harm is going to come in, and you're going to collapse. The Netanyahu government is finished. It's done. It's over. Its time in history is finished. Political Zionism is finished. It's done. I believe that the future will be dictated by a new Israeli government that has to deal with the realities they face, that they will not be able to emerge from this unless there is a viable Palestinian state, a two-state solution.
Scott, Israel has been marketing itself that it has an invincible army. It has a Mossad, which has its intelligence network, both technologically and also people on the ground in the Arab world. And it has been marketing this idea of an advanced technology, which it would sell to the countries which would normalize ties with it. Do you think after what Hamas has done with Israel now, the myth of Mossad being unparalleled, the myth of Israel military being so-called invincible, and the myth of Israel's advanced technology, which is it has been exporting to the many countries, and it wants to export to the countries which would normalize ties with it. Do you think it's all over?
Let me put it this way. I'm an American, and I believe in one of the foundational principles that define America, that all men are created equal. All men are created, and that means all men and women are created equal. All humanity is equal. That there's no difference between me and you. I may be an American, you may be Pakistani. There's no difference. There's no difference between an Israeli and an Egyptian, or an Israeli and a Palestinian. In sports, we can take two teams, and they can have similar physical capabilities, similar intellectual capabilities. But the team that has imbued itself with confidence, that believes that it is the best, and then convinces the other team that they are indeed the best, when you walk on the playing field, we know who's going to win. The team with confidence. Israel, for many decades now, has convinced the world that its intelligence services are the best, and the world believes it. We accepted it at face value. And so the world is intimidated by this. Israel has convinced the world that the Israeli Defense Force is unbeatable, and the world believed it. The Arab world believed it. They had an inferiority complex. Israel has been operating under this notion, and it's been exposed, of the ethnic superiority of the Jewish people over everybody else. That's the principle of political Zionism, is the supremacy of the Jewish people over everybody. Everybody is inferior to the Jews. And I'm not anti-Semitic. I support Jews, I support Muslims, I support Christians as equals. I will never support the notion that Jews are God's chosen people, because what does that make you and I? We are rejected by God. It's ridiculous. But nobody challenged it, because Israel had marketed itself as this exceptional nation with an exceptional people. That day's over. That day's over. Hamas proved that the Israelis bleed just like everybody else. Hamas proved that the Israelis are as human as everybody else, that the Israeli intelligence service is not infallible. They made a huge mistake, that the Israeli Defense Forces is not invincible. They die like everybody else when shot with a bullet. This is the reality. The myth of of Israeli Zionist supremacy has been eliminated. It's over.
An offshoot question. Do you think this was the reason because of which Israel enjoys support within the ranks and files of the Western government, or there is something else because of which Western governments have been supporting Israel despite the fact it has been conducting a genocide of Palestinians, not now, but also over the course of so many decades?
This is a tougher question. This is a very difficult question because it requires we in the West to be honest about what's happened here. We have allowed the mythology of Israel to be incorporated into our very existence, so that we identify with Israel as if it is us. So in the United States, we look at Israel and we identify Israel as an extension of America. In Europe, they look at Israel as an extension of Europe. It is not. Israel is a cruel Zionistic state that exists only because they've evicted hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their homes. They've imposed themselves in a very aggressive, brutal fashion on the Palestinian people. But because we identify as us, we forgive many of these sins. The other thing that's happened is Israel has used this relationship, the naivety of the West, against us. In the United States, we have an organization called the American Israeli Political Action or Public Affairs Committee. They are a political action group, but they call themselves Public Affairs. They have bought Congress. They own Congress. Congress right now can't look at the first thing that the newly elected Speaker of the House did when coming in. He didn't get up and say, I'm here for America. I'm here for the hardworking people of America. I'm here for the homeless in America. I'm here to make healthcare better. He said, the first thing I'm going to do is put a bill forward to get billions of dollars to Israel. That's the power that Israel has over the United States. They own the Congress. The Congress is their servant. I think one of the things that's going to happen from this is that we are going to be compelled to look at Israel in a new light and recognize that while Israel has a right to exist, like every other nation, that the Israeli people have a right to live in peace, that they are not us. Israel is not America. Israel is much different than America. They don't share our values. They don't share our principles. They are capable of committing mass murder against the Palestinian people. And that day is over. I think we're looking at a fundamental relook of how the West treats Israel, no longer as an extension, but as just another nation in the Middle East that has to learn how to live in peace with its neighbors.
Do you think Israel's nuclear program is safe enough? Its warheads are safe enough? And do you think it is a danger for the world? And under what condition do you fear Israel can possibly use its nuclear warheads?
Well, first of all, it does exist. Israel has a very massive nuclear weapons program. It is a threat to the internet. It's the threat to the world because it exists as part of a doctrine known as the Samson Option, meaning that if Israel ever feels that it's being defeated, it will use these nuclear weapons to kill everybody. What conditions would they use their nuclear weapons? I think one of the greatest threats right now is the fact that both Hezbollah and Iran possess conventional military capabilities that can destroy Israel. Hezbollah has hundreds of thousands of rockets, precision-guided rockets that will. Israel's a very small country, and it's even smaller when you remove the deserts and when you focus simply on the populated areas, on where their military resources are. It's a very limited number of targets. Hezbollah alone will be able to destroy these targets. Israel has no defense. If Iran comes in, the destruction will be by orders of magnitude even greater. It will literally be the physical destruction of Israel. And if this occurs, Israel will respond with nuclear weapons against Iran. That's a guarantee. And so now that we've identified this, I think we need to look at how do we get Israel to voluntarily give up its nuclear weapons program. And Israel can only do that if they believe that they are secure. But again, the idea of a two-state solution, in order for it to work, you have to eliminate the notion of Israeli exceptionalism, that Israel is not better than anybody else. The United States must immediately reverse its policy of ensuring that Israel has a technological advantage over its neighbors. No, you can't be equal if you've empowered yourself to be superior. Israel must be an equal, and we must limit their military. to that which is necessary for legitimate self-defense purposes, and we must get rid of their nuclear program. You know, I don't know. I saw some statements by Pakistani politicians who aren't the decision makers, but that if Israel attacks Iran, that Pakistan would join the fight by using its missiles. I think Israel needs to be told this, frankly, that if it uses nuclear weapons against Iran, that somebody is going to use nuclear weapons against Israel, that it's not a free game. Israel doesn't get to threaten people without feeling the threat in return. I'm not promoting nuclear conflict. I'm promoting actually nuclear disarmament. I would like Israel to get rid of its nuclear arsenal. I would like Pakistan to get rid of its nuclear arsenal.
And
I would like
Australia.
India, China, Russia, the United States, France, Great Britain. There's no reason for any nuclear weapons to exist in this world because all they do is threaten the world with global annihilation. But Israel cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapons program that threatens the region, because it's one thing to say the region threatens us, therefore we must defend ourselves. It's another thing to say, I am the bully who gets to beat anybody up, and if you dare stand up to me, I will drop a nuclear weapon on your house. And that's what currently exists. It's unacceptable.